Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hemisphere. Here we have a quick new episode for you guys. The start is a little bit different because I wasn't present at the start of this recording, but this is an amazing episode. But, guys, now we have something here for you guys. If you like the content that we were doing here, please consider helping the channel. Here are our ranks. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hemisphere podcast. I am your host, Ayala. I know you guys are not used to hearing my voice here. I am actually the script writer for most of the videos of our channel, but I know that usually you guys are hear Johnny's voice, but unfortunately, he's going to be a little bit late today. And here tonight, I have a very special guest, a guy that I actually have seen his content for quite a while by now, and someone who I believe has a very important message when it comes to geopolitics, when it comes to history. Some a really smart guy that I really admire. And well, welcome to the podcast, Rafael.
Yala, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here in the Hemisphere podcast. I hope you enjoy my content, and the content of this talk, as a matter of fact. But basically, I'm up to talk about basically anything: philosophy, history, geopolitics. To the guys who don't know me, I'm the president of the currently known as New Rome Association. Before that, it was the New Resistance Organization. But I'm also involved in a lot of other projects like the Ars Regia Publishing House, the Sovereignty Association. I also work in a radio show here in Brazil and a lot of other stuff. I translate and edit the Legio Victrix blog, which is basically where you find most of, I don't know, Dugin's, Alain de Benoit, Guillaume Fayet, and other dissident thinkers in Portuguese. It is a blog with already, I don't know, 16 years, 15 years. It comes even before New Resistance. So basically, that's it. For 20 years, 18 years, I've been involved in radical politics, in dissident politics, and that's it.
Oh, that's very interesting. I know you have a very long career in dissident politics, right? And I think that you have done a lot of work outside of Brazil. And that's something that I'm really interested about you. You probably have a lot of stories to tell us, right?
Yes. Regarding these past activities, well, I could say that I have traveled a lot inside Brazil. Also, I've been to Russia. I'm there. Yeah, I met Professor Dugin there, and also other dissident thinkers in 2024. I've been to the war zone in eastern Ukraine as a journalist. Yes, yes,
Wow, really?
as a journalist.
Oh,
Yes, yes, it was
that's
it
interesting.
was a bit dangerous. Yes.
How it was it? I'm curious right now. How it was it there, like in the front lines?
I'd say that people try to live normally because I visited some civilian locations and also some military locations, but people try to live normally. Of course, it's very hard when you live so close to the front lines because um, it's a kind of weekly occurrence that you can be hit by artillery shells. So of
Mhm.
course, even though we live in Brazil, and it also has its own danger, its own kind of danger. At least the Red Commando doesn't have, artillery or air force or something like that.
Yeah, at least they're not bombing our
Yes,
houses.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's
So
take it.
people try to live normally, basically. Of course, they support the government. They understand what's happening there. But of course, everyone is hoping for peace, for an end to the conflict.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting that like even in scenarios like this, people still like try to go on with their lives. It's really like a very stark contrast. Like you have this huge conflict happening right there on your doorstep. You're just trying to live your life. Uh, but yeah, I can imagine it's a very stark contrast. And something that you said that you sparked my interest in, you said that you visited a lot of military locations. What was your impression of it? Like how do you like what did you saw there and
So I could
everything?
test some guns. When I talk about military locations, it was mostly training locations for
Mhm.
new recruits or to get everyone more or less disciplined and aligned for military operations. So I could
Mhm.
test some guns like the AK-74, which is of course a new version of the old AK 47. I could test also
Mhm.
drone, FPV drone. It could also test, some other guns and machine guns. I could watch a bit of the training, assault training, rescue training. I could talk to the
Mhm.
guys because the places I visited were actually units composed of Ukrainians who are fighting against the
Mhm.
Ukrainian government. They are with the Russian
Oh.
armed forces, but they want to remove the current Ukrainian government because they consider that the
Mhm.
current Ukrainian government isn't that interested in the well-being of the Ukrainian people. So they deserted from the Ukrainian army, especially because recruitment in the Ukrainian armed forces nowadays is forced, basically. Uh, yeah, they take the guys from the street, they take guys from their homes sometimes. So, and they don't even give them enough training and send them to the front lines. So, some of these guys they end up surrendering themselves or deserting, trying to flee to Russia. And then they are offering themselves as volunteers for an unit where they can fight together as Ukrainians but against the Ukrainian government. So I talked to them inside Russia itself. I also visited a military recruitment place in Nizhny Novgorod, which is deeper in Russia. I'd say that 3 or 4 hours from Moscow. There, I also talked to volunteers. Why do they want to go to the special military operation? What do they expect? What do they believe in, etc. So, yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Oh, well, that's quite interesting. You said that you talked with a lot of volunteers, right? What were their thoughts about the war and everything that is happening?
Well, it's interesting because they consider this conflict as something that was uh, provoked or promoted by the West, in the sense that the West
Mhm.
infiltrated or influenced Ukraine into wanting to provoke Russia or even impose some laws or some rules over the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, the eastern part of Ukraine, where people don't actually speak Ukrainian. They are Russian Orthodox, etc. So, as a matter of fact, Kiev
Mhm.
changed a lot of laws. They tried to impose these new laws over these people and people in Russia, these volunteers at least, they understand that it's a kind of conflict between brothers, and that's something that they consider to be unfortunate. Most of the people I talk
Mhm.
to, they don't hate Ukrainians. They don't think Ukrainians are bad people. They mostly blame the Western European countries and the United States
Mhm.
because they acted through the NGOs, Open Society and USA, etc., to influence Ukraine to want to break their relations with Russia. So they have this kind of understanding.
Oh, okay, okay. I was always interested to, because you can never tell, right? You're, like always, there's a famous saying, like in a war, the first thing that dies is the truth, and I never could like kind of fathom what kind of thought that the average Russian had about this war, because usually, like one kind of media would tell a story, the other would tell another. But it's very enlightening to know from a first-hand account what the average Russian soldier thinks about it. That's quite interesting. And one thing that Vinicius mentioned to me is that you gave an interview to the Iranian state media. How was it? And also, what were your impressions of Iran?
Actually, I've given a reasonable amount of interviews to the Iranian state TV during the
Mhm,
last 2 or 3 years. It was maybe 10 or 11 interviews. Um,
mhm,
I've been also to the Iranian embassy in Brazil. Actually,
mhm,
I may go there I may go there in this month, February, because 11th, February 11 is the National Day of Iran, and they invited me to an event there. So I've
mhm.
been in touch. People know me in Brazil as, I don't know, a Russophile, as a guy who's connected to Russia, etc. But actually, I have also very good relations with Iran. Well, my impression regarding Iran is that it is a very complex country. People from,
Very diverse.
yes, very diverse. People from other parts of the world take Iran as a kind of Saudi Arabia, as a desert place with Bedouins and Arabs and hijabs, etc. And as a matter of fact, with women with burqa, and
Mhm,
a lot of stuff like that, very hot, etc. But as a matter of fact, Iran, for example, snows a lot. It's a cold
mhm,
country with very diverse climate, many ethnicities. Some of these
mhm.
ethnicities, like the Persians, for example, they are usually a bit similar to, for example, Mediterranean Europeans. So
Really?
yeah, some of them are, some of them are. So it's not like, Saudi Arabia or other countries like that. Even, yes, even Qatar or the Emirates, etc. So it's a very interesting country. The political system is also very interesting because it is partially based on Plato's republic, on Plato's idea
Oh,
of kind of political structure ruled by
mhm.
philosophers. So
Right.
the
Yeah.
idea of Ayatollah Khomeini was basically to adapt it to Shia Islam. Of course, he didn't invent it because other Muslim thinkers, as a matter of fact, Muslims during the Middle Ages preserved Plato and Aristotle a bit more than the European Christians, and then European Christians also
Mhm.
began to, get a bit of that from
Yeah.
Avicenna, Averroes, etc. So they already had a very strong Platonic tradition. So Khomeini, who was actually trained and educated as a philosopher and poet, he got these Islamic readings from Plato and tried to adapt it to a modern society. But the people is I actually interviewed a Brazilian guy who studied in Iran for 6 years. I interviewed him 2 or 3 days ago. He studied in Iran for 6 years to become a cleric, a sheikh. So he's a Brazilian convert to Shia Islam. He lives in São Paulo, and for example, he says that Iranian people is extremely diverse, even in political positions. That they also distinguish between the government and the state, in the sense that, well, some of the problems that we have, it's because of the president, not because of, for example, Ayatollah Khamenei or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. So it's not like they paint it in the West. For example, women use the hijab if they want to, especially nowadays. It's not something imposed. And as a matter of fact, he says that he visited one of the female universities, because um, women in Iran are very well educated. They go to the university, etc. And he went to one of these universities, I think, to give a speech or something like that. And because of the recent changes in Western culture, with OnlyFans, etc. One of the girls said to my friend, "Oh, now I understand why here in our country, everyone wants us to wear the hijab."
Good
Because
job.
in the West, it's the exact opposite, and girls are already selling their bodies online, teenage girls,
That
etc.
for basically like pennies on the dollar, right? I mean, I was seeing something like an average OnlyFans girl don't even earn like a lot of money. Like, so they're basically selling it for free almost. It's really,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, nowadays the competition is very harsh. It seems there's a lot of girls doing the same thing, and they are now having to compete with Indians using artificial intelligence fake accounts, where they create 10, 11, 12 blonde girls with OnlyFans, and other Indian guys or other kinds of guys believe it and pay it, etc.
Jesus Christ! It's always Indians coming up with something, but yeah, I saw that. I saw that. I saw real. God damn it! Even the OnlyFan girls are gonna get replaced by AIs.
Yes, everyone is being replaced.
Yeah, I can understand their vision, right? For the questions of the investments, the clothes. So you mentioned that a lot of them have dissatisfactions with the president. I'm not very educated on how the politics in Iran works. Could you like give me a further insight what like the how politics work there, what people think of their politicians there?
Yes, of course. In Iran, there are no political parties, but everyone can put himself as a candidate. They usually do it through a kind of association, like a neighborhood association or a professional association, not through a party, but through other kinds of associations. And usually it is expected that politicians first get small charges, in the sense that first the guy needs, if the guy wants to be president, he's not going to become president from one day to the other, because he has a lot of followers on X or on YouTube or something like that. It is expected that the guy first manages a city or a small region or something like that, and then the guy goes growing little by little. The clerics, as a matter of fact, they function in a very similar fashion as the moderating power in the Brazilian Empire, in the sense that for example, they veto nominations of political officials, ministers, for example. They veto some laws. They have a kind of moderating power, but people vote for president. And for example, in the last elections, because the other president, Ibrahim Raisi, died in a helicopter accident, and then they had another
Mhm,
election, and the guy who won, who is Masoud Pezeshkian. He actually
mhm,
is a kind of liberal, a kind of moderate. So he wasn't the favorite candidate of
mhm,
the system itself. And nonetheless, he actually is ruling as president of Iran. But if he tried to maybe change something too deeply, then the Guardian Council would veto the law. So it's a kind of, it's basically like the moderating power of the Brazilian emperor in the sense. But well, people vote, and when I talked about the complaints regarding the current president, it's because, well, currently there's a water crisis in Iran, and also some
Hmm.
economic problems that they associate with some economic decisions of the current government regarding the currency, etc. So I think actually he valued the currency excessively or something like that, and created a kind of ripple
Right.
effect on the economy. So that's one of the reasons for the recent protests. But on
Hmm.
during the first days, they were mostly peaceful protests from, unions and professional associations and students, etc. And then after some days, some masked guys began invading buildings, trying to put cars on fire, and beginning acts of violence. And then things began getting weird in the sense that it seems at first it was a legitimate movement of protest against some bad decisions. And then some
Hmm.
masked guys, like, for example, the Black Blocs in Brazil years ago, they
Yeah,
began.
it's very many.
Yes, they infiltrated. They began trying to change the protest movement in a kind of anti-government regime change operation.
Oh, you think that there is somebody behind this?
Oh, it's most probably both the United States and Israel.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Israel is a very old enemy of Iran, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. No, that's quite interesting. I didn't know how the Iranian government worked. I mean, you talk about the stereotypes. I think I was watching. He was a guy who had nothing to do with politics. It was like a music channel, but it was from a guy from Iran, and I believe he was from the northern Iran or something like that. He talked about there was a video that was talking about Iranian music, but he also came to the topic of the general stereotype that the West has of Iran, which I believe it might be like a general stereotype for like the every eastern country from that region, right? They just believe it's just a huge desert, and like there is like a brutal Sharia law and something like this, and they're like gonna cut your head if you have a Bible or something like this. But it's quite interesting to break some of those stereotypes, right? And I saw that like the northern part of Iran has a lot of heavy rainforests, if I'm not mistaken, right? They do have a very diverse country.
Yes, I have the impression that they have very big forests, and I've actually seen some tourism publicity regarding ski stations. So, if you don't want to go to Aspen or Switzerland or maybe southern Argentina, you can go skiing in Iran or something like that.
Well, if I ever have the money one day, I'll sure as hell will go. Sure seems fun.
Yes, of course.
Well, but okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Wow, I knew that's Vinicius suggested me to ask you that question because I knew he knew, and I knew it too that you probably had a lot of stories to tell. But that's very interesting. One thing that you mentioned in the beginning that you have, like in your blog, you have a lot of translated works of Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, and I know he's quite controversial here in the West. And I want to ask you something that you went to Russia too. Um, what do they think about Dugin? Because I know that here in the West, like people have a kind of a mixed impression of him. There are some people that hate him. There are some people who like him. But what Russians think of him? Like, I mean, I don't know if he's very well known there outside of like intellectual circles. What would you say about that?
Well, I don't know if there's a kind of average opinion on Dugin, because maybe it would be very hard to, get everyone to agree, because it's a very big country also, and
Mhm,
ideologically Russia is extremely diverse too. But
mhm,
I'd say that nowadays, at least, he's extremely respected in official circles. We could say that maybe in the 90s, he began as a kind of very alternative, underground, subversive guy.
mhm,
Then in the end of the 90s and the beginning of the new millennium, he
mhm,
was advisor to some politicians in the Duma, the Legislative Council of Russia.
mhm,
Then after that, he worked mostly as a university professor, a college
mhm,
professor in geopolitics, also sociology, I think also philosophy, etc. And then in 2014, um, he basically was purged from his teaching position because of his opinions regarding Ukraine.
mhm,
Um, but during this period, he worked mostly in a kind of cultural private sector, because the conservative, patriotic, monarchist movement in Russia is growing a lot,
mhm,
and Dugin is part of that. But after the beginning of the special military operation 2022, and also especially after the murder of his daughter, it
mhm,
seems that his importance is growing a lot. For example, one of my comrades, one of my guys, visited Russia also during these last years. And inside the Ministry of Education, for example, there's an office that belongs to Dugin's movement. So they have an office inside the Ministry of Education. I organized a congress together with Dugin, an online congress together with Dugin and Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He sent a video to the congress I organized with Dugin. So he also has very strong connections in the foreign ministry Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been invited into the most exclusive clubs in Russia, clubs in the
mhm,
sense of think tanks like the Valdai Club,
mhm,
which houses many of the biggest intellectuals. So, for example, there's a kind of impression that, at least in the West, that Dugin is like
Rasputin.
Putin's Rasputin, you know?
Yeah. Mhm,
And then against this kind of current, there are those who say that no, Dugin is not well known, he's not
mhm,
respected, no one talks about Dugin. As a matter of fact, I'd say that the truth is more or less in the middle.
mhm,
But nowadays, he's a bit more respected than years ago. Then, for
mhm,
example, when they began talking that, saying that he's Putin's Rasputin, when they actually began saying that from Dugin, he actually didn't have a lot of influence. But
mhm.
nowadays, he actually does have some influence
Yeah.
inside official circles. And for example, his father was a general, so also he has some family connections inside the military. So it's something that who's respected, and the guys who don't like him inside Russia, in many cases, it's basically because they think some things like him, but other
Mhm,
things not, in the sense that, you have many ideological currents inside Russia, and as a matter
mhm.
of fact, many patriotic varieties. Just like in
Oh,
Brazil,
yeah.
you have monarchists fighting against integralists, fighting
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
against laborists, fighting against NCAPs, etc., and
Yeah.
other kinds
I
of
mean,
guys. And in fighting against fascists or whatever else.
I know it's like an ideological infighting, right?
Yes, in Russia, there are also a lot of a bit of infighting between the different nationalistic versions or schools, etc. For
Mhm,
example, I know a guy who I've met in person, etc. And
mhm.
he doesn't like Dugin as an intellectual, but then I read the book from this guy, and he says many of the same things that Dugin says. So it's something like, different small groups inside Russia who don't see each other in the eye. But on an official level, Dugin's influence is a very big influencer nowadays.
Yeah, you can kind of. It's almost impossible to avoid him in the modern debate. I mean, even if you don't like him, like I was interested like that because I am a huge fan of Carl Schmitt, and I know that Dugin uses a lot of Carl Schmitt, even though he doesn't like. He does some innovations to Carl Schmitt's theory. I know that he draws a lot of inspiration from it, right?
Yes, 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 of course. Um, as a matter of fact, I'd say that in the sense that Carl Schmitt was part of a bigger current, a bigger intellectual current, a bigger intellectual movement, so to say, in the sense of the conservative revolution in Germany. Dugin represents a kind of conservative revolution in Russia. So he drinks a lot from Schmidt, Heidegger, Jung, and the other thinkers of the same current.
Oh, that makes sense. And like, what do you think that there are like the major differences between the German, of course, from the obvious stuff, like we live in a completely different context from like 1940s Germany, but like, what do you think are the biggest ideological innovations that Dugin brought to Schmittian theory, or the German Revolution theory in general?
Well, let me see. Well, Dugin is more, at least compared to most of the conservative revolution intellectuals, Dugin is closer to a traditionalist reading of the world in the sense of Jules Evelyn, René Guénon. That's something that's,
Um,
even though actually Evola had a very intimate connection to the German conservative revolution, but he was something a bit different, a bit different than that. Dugin also brings this kind of traditionalist reading, a more metaphysical reading of the world that also comes together with these conservative revolutionary readings, specifically regarding Carl Schmitt, I'd say that Dugin expands the land-sea distinction, the land-sea dichotomy. So Schmitt, for example, of course, he also gives it a kind of metaphysical reading because the metaphor itself is biblical in origin. But
yeah.
Dugin connects it to other aspects because, of course, since he has this traditionalist education, this traditionalist perspective, he also focuses a lot on that. Let me see other aspects. Well, as a matter of fact, I'd say that regarding if we take the larger context, well, the conservative revolution was very diverse itself in the sense that inside it there was, for example, the National Bolshevik current from Ernest
Mhm,
Niekisch. And Ernest
mhm,
Junger also participated a bit on it. So the Russian perspective on the conservative revolution, at least in a first moment, is also mostly directed towards this national Bolshevik perspective.
mhm.
So it would be at least in the 90s it was a bit less diverse than the German
Yeah.
conservative revolution. Let me see other aspects. um It is, and the Russian version is extremely vanguardist on an artistical level, in the sense that guys that were part of Dugin's movement in the 90s, for example, they had punk rock bands. They were extremely involved in what we would say was a kind of counterculture. You know,
Hmm.
of course, maybe if we take some aspects of the Weimar Republic, the Wandervögel, in some sense, they were kind of countercultural, and that's why they influenced the hippie movement in the United States, as a matter of fact. But
Oh,
I'd say that the Russians were a bit more subversive. Mm, so
okay.
there are some differences. Most of it is a bit similar and different in the sense that the context is different. But for example,
Yeah,
Dugan
yeah.
emphasizes
Sure.
some concepts more than others. For example, Schmidt takes the idea of the Großraum, the great space
Hmm.
in a new nomos of the earth, as a kind of possibility, as something that could maybe emerge, it would make sense, etc. Dugin takes it as a kind of necessity in a more ideological driven sense, you know. So
Yeah,
Dugin is at the same time a philosopher and a militant, an activist. So
yeah.
he
Absolutely.
uses it to get to specific positions.
Okay. That's very clarifying.
Hey, hello,
Hi,
Hams.
Johnny.
I'm
I
so
told I
sorry, I just got in.
present yourself, Johnny.
Oh yeah, please. First of all, nice to meet you, Mr. Rafael. It's a pleasure.
Nice to meet you. A pleasure also.
The co-founder of the Hemisphere, together with Ayala, as you can see. And sorry, I was a little bit late because of some problems here where I live, but we're here now. I'm sure you guys have been having a great conversation so far. Sorry if I seem a little bit lost here in the middle, but I don't know if it's very related or if Ayala even asked that question. Rafael, pushing a little bit of the conversation here to another side,
Yeah.
do you think that, for example, they say it in Portuguese, revoluções acontecem no exterior, but in English would be revolutions happen outside of the country in a way. Do you think that the idea of Brazil as I like to say that Brazil has the mutt ideology, the ideology that it's like a dog with no race, like he doesn't identify where it's from, where is it going, and everything like that. But at the same time, there's a prestige in the English language, especially on American content in general, because of course we're in their hemisphere, we could say that. Do you think that that idea is real? Like the idea that American or English content will eventually grow out in, let's say, in a global media and then reflect it back to Brazil and cause some change? Because like one of our ideas here on the hemisphere is not only to create content in English about Brazil and geopolitics in Latin America, but not only in English for a global audience, but as well in a way to eventually reflect back to Brazil in a way that Brazilians often like things better when it
Mhm.
comes from abroad. What do you think of this statement in general? Do you think we're a little bit delusional? Do you think I know it's a big statement, but like as you as someone that has experience, living abroad, studying abroad, and everything like that, like what do you think of that?
No, it makes sense. For example, I'm a headbanger kind of guy. So, for example, if we take Sepultura or Angra, they first got famous outside of Brazil, and then they only got famous in Brazil because they were famous outside Brazil. So Brazilians thought, of course, not consciously, they thought, oh, these guys are famous outside Brazil, so they must be very good, they must be great because gringos, foreigners, they love these guys, so these guys need respect. So Brazilians are pretty much like that. I'd say that it's a kind of, yes, as a matter of fact, in English, it would be mud ideology. It's true. Yeah, Brazilians are intellectually mutts, and that's of course very bad. It's not great because freedom begins inside our minds, on the idealism versus materialism philosophical debate. I pretty much on the side of idealism in the sense that first we create our own realities inside our minds, and then it reflects outside of us. So since
Mhm.
Brazilians are actually mentally colonized, sometimes something like that needs to be done. But also, there's another kind of aspect to it in the sense of resentment, in the sense that Brazilians don't like success when it's too close to them, in the sense of the success of the neighbor, the success of the cousin, the success of the guy from your street. So they like success that's far away, and then they get inspired by it, but not success that's too close to home. Your strategy, I'd say there's no problem with it because um,
Sorry, Rafael, you cut it off a bit. I couldn't hear you. I couldn't hear the last thing we heard you say was your strategy is good.
Yeah, so as I was saying, I'd say that your strategy makes sense because Brazilians actually think like that, and it's possible to work with with these characteristics. So to get to the Brazilian audience from from the other side.
Yeah. Uh, Talking about Brazil, and we were talking about Johnny. We were talking about Schmittian philosophy and Duginist philosophy, as a matter of fact, before you came in. And now that we are discussing Brazil, I would like to know your opinion, Rafael, because that's something that always, was on my mind. I always thought about this. How do we fit Brazil in this kind of political and geopolitical analysis? Like, what Duganism thinks of Brazil? Like, are we a sea civilization? Are we a land civilization?
From what I've read, he identifies Brazil as a land civilization. He considers, for example, that
Mm,
Portugal's expansion in Brazil, at least specifically in Brazil, has a kind of telluric characteristic in the sense that it was motivated by
mhm,
a medieval Catholic spirit that as a kind of continuation from the Crusades, the Reconquista Crusade. The values that were implanted in Brazil were have has these telluric characteristic. I'd say that by reading Gilberto Freire, for example, that's very clear in the sense that our colonization,
mhm,
even though it was concentrated on the coast, it was a feudal colonization.
mhm,
The Portuguese guys,
mhm,
they organized land and they instituted themselves as patriarchs in a very conservative society, very preoccupied with agriculture, not very much interested in trade, for example, and not very little liberal in this sense, pretty much conservative, authoritarian, communitarian. So yeah, I'd say that Brazil's building is mostly a kind
mhm.
of land. Axiologically, it's a land country. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't need a navy, submarines, etc. Also the
Yeah,
objective,
yes.
the mission of the country in the sense of the march towards the west that was pretty much talked about during Vargas government and also during the military dictatorships, etc., in the sense
Mhm,
that we need to colonize the west, we need to go to the Amazon rainforest, we need to continue the colonization of Brazil because the colonial process, the occupation process wasn't actually finished. So this kind of mentality is pretty much land based in the
mhm,
sense.
mhm. It's kind of like the manifest destiny, even though the United States is pretty much like a sea power and Atlantic power. I think it looks like a very similar idea, right? Even though it's like have their different parts.
Yes, even though I'd say that maybe the manifest destiny had a more of of a religious underpinning in the sense of the all the Calvinist Puritan ideas of of a New Jerusalem, etc. But in the it's similar, and actually the United States, in some sense, has had a kind of dual nature in the sense that they could have developed in a pretty much land-based direction, or they could, well, do what they actually did and become a sea power. So it was always a possibility that they could become actually a land-based country. Maybe, for example, I don't know if the other side had won in the Civil War. Maybe, for example, if the idea of the Monroe Doctrine had been kept very limited, because it was originally very limited and then it became something something more. Yes, yes, precisely. Especially from Ted Roosevelt onward, it became something a bit different. So yeah, I'd say that almost every country could, even though when it's, for example, England itself, when we think about England during both the Celtic time, the Saxon time, and even the beginning of the Norman time, it was basically a very traditional Indo-European land-based culture, and yes, and then suddenly it everything changes in regarding culture, ideology, government, uh, expansion strategy, values, etc. So even England maybe could have kept as a been kept as a land-based country, and well, even Russia could have become a kind of, maybe not a sea power because of the geographical limitations, but it could have the same mentality in the sense of a trade-based egalitarian society in this sense.
Yeah, yeah. I heard that. I heard a bit from Russian nationalists. They talk about this dichotomy between Moscow and, I believe, Novgorod. I forgot the name of that Viking colony that existed in Russia.
St. Petersburg, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the right region. It was like a merchant republic, almost like something like that. And they said if Russia went in that direction, probably would be more a sea-based power rather than a land-based power.
The Novgorod
Yeah,
Republic,
yeah,
I
exactly.
see.
Novgorod Republic. Exactly. And now that you talked about the United States, that's something that I noticed because I lived for quite a while in New England for a couple of months. And you can really notice like the difference, even like on how people see the world when you go to like places like New England that were like kind of the birthbed of this idea of America as a great merchant sea power, in contrast with more like with the South of the United States, the Midwest. You can kind of see like a very different kind of mentality. That's actually quite noticeable, and it's a very interesting point that that you said. I still believe that America does have like this kind of dual nature, and I think it reflects in politics. Like you usually don't.
No, no, no. Yes, yes, yes. Because this kind of this duality, land and sea, it also manifests itself inside the country. In the sense of the inner contradictions of the country. Usually, for example, the capital is a kind of island
Mhm.
in a kind of sea island inside of a land country. For example, France. Of course,
It's like a
yes, it's
world
always a
city,
world
right?
city in the Spenglerian sense. The Paris.
Oh,
Okay,
hello. Oh, can hear you.
so for
Sorry,
example,
keep going.
Paris, it's a kind of world city. It's a world city, and all the other regions, all the other parts of France, it's very rooted in multi-secular tradition and culture and civilization. London, for example, even inside a very sea-based country like England again, We could contrast, for example, London
mhm,
and the so-called merry old England, in the sense of these small towns that Tolkien, for
mhm,
example, loved, etc. Germany, the same thing, but Germany has another kind of division between West Germany and East Germany. West Germany as a whole,
mhm,
mostly, it's a kind of it became a sea society, while Eastern Germany
mhm,
it's a land society. And in the United States, the division is
mhm,
not precisely the capital and the interior, but the coast. You know, West Coast and East Coast, which are
mhm,
which have sea values, and all the inner region, the southern region, the Middle West, the north, you know, close to Canada, etc. Texas, for example, it's a very specific kind of place.
mhm,
So yes, this kind of conflict between Behemoth and Leviathan, between land and sea, also happens inside each country. Even, for example, if we take Brazil, what could we say
mhm,
about Brazil? I'd say that in Brazil, this also happens, but with with some specificity in the sense that what matters are
mhm,
the regional capitals, in the sense that Porto Alegre, Curitiba, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia, and of course, you know, the capitals of the northeast, etc. They are cosmopolitan cities, but
mhm.
you know, 1 hour
Yeah,
from these cosmopolitan cities, 1 hour from Porto Alegre, 1 hour from São Paulo, you get to another country, basically. You know, you get to a very different kind of place with very different values.
exactly, exactly. That's something that we are even writing about this. We're gonna make a was writing. I wrote a Substack, but also we were writing a video about this and like how there's like big difference between because usually the capitals of Brazil are more or less located on the coast, right? At least the majority of them. Difference between like the more sea-based civilization that the capitals live. For example, in our state, Paraná, we Johnny doesn't live here anymore, but I still live in Londrina. It's a city right on the middle of like the countryside of Paraná. You see, there's like a very stark difference between how people behave here, how people act here, even political alignment of people compared with the capital. They're like the capital city usually tends to be more liberal, more cosmopolitan. I think you define it right. You put it perfectly.
Yes, yes.
And
I think it makes sense. Even though Curitiba itself is a bit more you know,
conservative.
conservative compared to other capital cities like Porto Alegre. Porto Alegre, for example,
Yeah.
which also is in the south, but it
Mhm.
has a very different frame of mind. And even, for example, if we take Santa Catarina,
Yeah.
which is famous as a Bolsonarist country, the big cities, they are cosmopolitan in another kind of sense, in a kind of Miami sense, and not in a kind of Los Angeles sense, you know?
Mhm. A bit more. And I think that what do you believe that there's like sort of this difference? From why do Brazil has this peculiarity, sir? Why do we work like this?
In the sense that, for example, in the South, we like Bolsonaro, in the Northeast, Lula.
No, I mean like the sense that you said at the beginning, like usually about the regional capitals and something like this. Like why do we have this difference from the rest of the world?
I'd say that it's like with most countries, in the sense that the big city, some thinkers would say that there is a kind of intrinsic opposition between the city and
Mhm.
the, how could we say it, the land, the farm, the region, or something like that. And
Mhm.
in the sense that the city, or at least the big city, always tends towards the world, always tends to become cosmopolitan, to uproot itself, and then to become very similar to every other city, in the sense that, for example, São Paulo, if we ignore the monuments, the historical buildings, São Paulo is indistinguishable from, New York
Yeah.
or Tokyo
Yeah.
or London, etc. And that happens in most big cities, and that's very hard to avoid, because inside capitalism there's a kind of Occam's razor way of seeing things, in the sense that what we do what's less effort, what's effortless, in the sense that, well, it's cheaper to build cities like that, it's maybe cheaper or easier to live like that.
Mhm.
We should build buildings with glass and cement because it's cheaper. We don't need historical buildings. We don't need to respect history. It's better like that,
Mhm.
etc. So everything tends, when you put profit above everything else, everything tends to become homogeneous.
Yeah, it's a very materialistic mentality, right?
Yeah.
It's something that really annoys me sometimes in the modern mindset that people usually only think about efficiency. Like, will this be efficient for the economy? Oh, will this be good? Will this be profitable? Like, like I was seeing a video today. It was like an Obama era video. Was a guy giving an argument why people should legalize gay marriage, and like what bothered me was like how he constructed his argument. Like he said like, well, if we had gay marriage, if you legalize it, we can make the economy go up, because we're gonna have more divorces. We're gonna have some lawyers will make more money. We're going to sell, more therapy for gay couples. And I was like, what? Okay, but what does this matter? I mean, okay, but that doesn't justify, morally. Like he didn't even try to justify this morally. So he took like the fact that it would have an economic benefit as something that would justify legalizing it, you know. And it's a thing.
Yes.
I think it's a stupid mentality, sincerely. Like,
Yes, the only thing that matters is that the arrows go up in the graph, or that the numbers go up in the Excel sheet.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
that's why I have sorry, and that's why I have so much prejudice against like some of the new right-wing movements in Brazil. Not that we shouldn't be free market or everything, but there's some speeches that are very against workers for no reason whatsoever. Like against like, basic needs like maternity and paternity leave and such and such. Like, I don't know, just we need to make the green arrow go up. We can't live a good life, or whatever. So just putting that in the air.
Yes, no, I agree. I agree, because I'd say that living the good life is the only thing that matters. We need to build societies that allow people to live recently. And some of these guys, they always talk about, oh, China got big because of that, because they had no worker rights. Well, it's not exactly like that. It's not only because they didn't have worker rights, because in sub-Saharan Africa there are also no worker rights. There are no worker rights in Haiti, in
uh,
Somalia, etc. And that's not it. you know
pretty much.
and yeah, no, and there's something from the left to the right. Like I was in a class, like I'm studying international relations here abroad, and one person in my class, like not even joking, we were talking about, oh yeah, America's losing jobs to deindustrialization. Oh, that's sad. Yeah, and then this girl stands up and say, you know what? Americans need to learn how to get jobs. Maybe they should all move to other towns where they have more jobs. So like it ignores the whole idea of like, yeah, I've been in this town for generations now. I've built this town. And it creates on the idea like if human beings are like cattle and can be moved from town to town from a government force, that's basically what she was like proposing. Then what is the point? Are we working for the economy or is the economy working for us? And I feel like those are things that scare me a
Yes,
bit.
I have the impression that America is already like that. The US is already like that in the sense that you always hear about people born in a certain city and then they need to go to college on the other side of the country and they meet a girl in another state and they marry and they go live somewhere else and they never see their parents again, only during
Yeah.
Christmas season
Yeah, yeah,
or during
yeah.
the
Like any
yes,
holidays
during the
whatsoever. Yeah,
holidays.
yeah, yeah.
And that's bad. That's actually bad. Maybe most US social and cultural problems, maybe it comes from this degradation of the family unit, of the connection between people who know each other forever and who live in the same place forever because they are ancestors. At least maybe, decades ago, they used to be born in a certain city, study there. Of course, then if they need to go to college, and most wouldn't go to college, if they need to go to college, it would probably be in the closest big city, 2 or 3 hours from home, and they will keep meeting and seeing their parents. They are probably going to marry a girl they studied with or who they met in college or something like that. But nowadays it's not like that. It's expected that everyone behaves like a nomad, and that began in the U.S. and it's spreading to everywhere else. So
Yeah. It's not a country anymore. It's an
it's an
economical
economic
zone. Like,
zone and it's a kind of a kind of international culture in the sense that the idea that's hegemonic nowadays is to transform citizens or to transform people into economic cogs that are interchangeable and uprooted in the sense that today we you could go looking for a job in Japan, and you stay there for 2 years, and then you go to Russia and stay there for 3 years, and maybe marry some girl there, and then you find a job in Egypt and etc. And the elite is already like that also. In the sense that, for example, Elon Musk, who is an African, it seems, and has married, I don't know, a lot of women and supposedly has a dozen kids. Some people say that without having sex. I don't know, but the girls themselves, the women themselves, they are from all parts of the U.S. or the Western world or even some other places, and it's like that. The elite lives like that, and they want us to live like that also. That's why they promote migration. It's not specifically, oh, we want to destroy Europe or something like that. The idea is to also in the future turn Africans, for example, in an uprooted people. For example, people in Tunisia, in Africa, they complain about mass migration. That's a world problem because it's a kind of world project to turn every human being in a nomad without their own property, without their home, without a car, without,
you won't own anything, and you'll still be happy. It's the
precisely,
correct quote.
yes. That's the
Yeah.
plan.
The Davos people. And Rafael, you talked about family. Something that an idea that I find interesting, and I want to know your opinion about. I heard that some people were saying that even this, like the American right has its own romanticization of the 1950s American and everything. They want to go back to the 50s and something. But I was reading an article about this that they were saying that like even the nuclear family that was so much idealized in the 50s is a kind of degeneracy. Like it's a kind of like a it's not really how traditional families worked, right? Because usually before modernity, people would live around their uncles, their grandfathers, everything. But what do you think of that?
Yes, of course, maybe it's a bit complicated in the sense that it's very hard to live in a kind of house where there's space for 20 people, 30 people or something like
Mhm.
that. Maybe, for example, if we had never moved and we could have, I don't know, big land property. We could maybe go building, annexes to our homes or something like that. But in a more practical sense, yes, the real conception, the traditional conception of family is more like extended family. Even if we don't live together, at least we try to live close to each other and support each other. And if someone
Yeah.
needs it, for example, let's suppose that grandpa lost his wife, grandmother is dead, grandpa is living alone. Instead of putting him in an old people's house, we should put him home. We should invite him to live with us. That's how things are done,
Mhm.
for example, in Brazil, in Latin America in
Yeah.
general, in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, and many other places like Russia, China, and other places. You don't put your parents in a crazy people home for them to die outside your gaze. You bring them back, you bring them to your home. And
Yeah.
let's suppose that you have a brother or a sister, and your sister married a guy and everything was great, but then the guy lost his job and he can't pay for rent anymore, at least for some time. You invite your sister and your brother-in-law
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to your home, to stay there for 6 months, a year, until they get back together with everything
Mhm.
okay, etc. So that's at least on a modern situation where we don't live in long houses or anything like that. In a
Yeah.
modern context, yes, we do stuff like that. It's how things are done. It's what family is about. If possible, of course. For example, nowadays I live in a building, and I'm a neighbor to my parents, and of course, for example, we lived apart for a long time, but we
Mhm.
try to conciliate our moves, our contexts, until the point where we could live in the same building. And of course, for example, if I need something, my dad helps me. If they need something, I go downstairs and help them, etc. So we can adapt. We don't need to accept modernity in the sense that, oh, nowadays we don't live together and that's it. No, of course we
Mhm.
can maybe buy homes next to each
Uh-huh.
other, or in the same street, or at
Yeah.
least in the same neighborhood, or the
At least,
same building,
at
etc.
least in the same city, right? I mean,
Yes, at least the same city. Yes.
And you know what? It's directly like I directly can quote like a movie that I watched a long time ago. It's like this whole idea of the American dream and how, oh my god, we need to be more like America because America grew, So like we need to copy their society as if their society is even it's better than us, in relation to like family and society as we live in. I feel like America did not win World War II and eventually the global order because they have any type of moral superiority. They just happened to win it. So the whole idea that this Protestant idea of like working and the working, like for you to work is the way to go, and you need to be away from your parents and everything like that. I feel like that's something that has been eaten up by the world because of the New World Order. And I'm interested to think of like what would be a New World Order and an eventual, let's say, decline of America or such thing like that. Not saying that it's going to happen now, but eventually it has to change. Before America, everyone used to copy the French model, especially like in Brazil, for example.
yeah.
So I like to throw that idea in the air as well because like, what else? What could be?
Yes. Of course, we don't know how things are going to go, and in some sense, everything depends on these current geopolitical conflicts. If Russia is going to win in Ukraine, if China is going to take Taiwan, if Europe is going to begin walking with their own
Uh
legs
huh.
instead of with the US legs, and the Middle East conflicts, etc. But my impression is that there's going to be decline in the US, in the sense that, not in the sense that they're going to collapse or cease to exist, etc. Even the separatist option or perspective, I think that's not very probable, because the institutions in the US are very strong, they are very solid. The Pentagon, for example, is very united. It's not like in the 19th century. So it's very hard for something for the country to collapse or to disintegrate, but it will need to adapt to a situation where they are only going to be able to influence what's near them, in the sense of Canada,
Uh-huh.
Caribbean region, probably, or maybe Mexico and Central America, and I hope not this South America at least. And then in
Yeah.
Europe, we are going to see maybe eventually with a new leadership, a more united Europe, Russia controlling its own backyard, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, the Caucasus, etc. China influencing all the region. I think it's inevitable. For example, that South Korea is going to fall into China's orbit. Japan is going to fall into China's orbit because it's going to be very expensive for the US to keep maintaining all their possessions, all their bases, all their influence in Japan, on the other side of the Pacific, in South Korea, etc. So the world, I'd say that the world is going to be more regionalized in the sense that, um, and we see this tendency even since the the sanitary crisis, the pandemic crisis, in the sense that we were depending on imports from China, from Japan, from Europe for basic pharmaceutical and medical material, no? And nowadays, at least in some countries, there's a bigger effort, to get the basic from the neighboring countries. Oh, here in Brazil, we need to get our stuff from Brazil itself, from Argentina, from Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, etc. It's the same mentality in Russia, for example, especially since the sanctions. Nowadays, it's all made in Russia or China or Iran or Belarus, etc. China, of course, they only need to import, resources, natural resources. But the United States itself, what they are trying to do with the tariffs, it's basically like that. They are trying to bring back at least a part of their production so that they can become a bit more self-sufficient, and that's going to impact also on other levels, not only economy. For example, nowadays China is creating amazing video games, RPG games,
Uh-huh.
strategy
Uh-huh.
games, etc. The Russians are beginning also to build a very strong video game industry, mostly history based or mythologically based, stuff based on their own traditions, etc. The Iranians also have a reasonably small video game industry. Movies, cinema in China is very strong nowadays, their own
Yes.
domestic cinema. Russia is also becoming very strong, at least domestically. Turkey, of course, already influences in Brazil, in South America. So even culturally, it's going to be a much more diverse and regionalized in this sense. It's only Brazil that's lagging backward. Nothing is
Uh-huh.
being done in Brazil. We don't have nuclear weapons. Our cinema sucks because it's mostly
Mhm.
about the military dictatorship, favelas, and the Northeast.
Uh-huh.
We actually don't have a video game industry. We we are lagging backwards in everything. We lost our influence in South America. The United States basically stole our influence in the neighboring countries.
And I would even continue to that. Sorry to interrupt you, but like in relation to like Brazil, with everything, like even Turkey has its own reach of geopolitics and cultural geopolitics. Like in our understanding here, like why and how can we had another talk in a previous podcast that we talked to one of Brazilian right wing researcher that he does history on like various political figures and everything, and he wanted to do like one about Conde, like the husband of Princess Isabel. And he was like, you know what? One thing that the left does right is that they fund researchers, and the right wings in Brazil and people from the right do not fund any research. Like you could have a bunch of right wing billionaires or whatever or millionaires. No one funds right wing research and right wing media.
So I feel like it's the same. Not that the right wing media is the way to go, because I personally don't like the idea of right and left, but there's no investment whatsoever in culture, and if there is some, it's seen as a bad thing. Like it should come naturally. All all the most important artists and philosophers in the world, in a way, got funding either from banks, governments, and everything like that. And that's something that Brazil falls on behind, and I agree with that with you. And I would
Yes.
even ask in relation to that, like, should we, should Brazil invest more in financing itself and developing itself as a major global player on our side of the world, the Atlantic South, or should Brazil aim even higher and try to be like a global cultural challenger? You know?
Yes, I agree with you. We need only to remember the fact that we got our 200 independence anniversary during Bolsonaro's government, and he basically did nothing with that. 200 years of independence. We should have had huge, parades, military parades with, I don't know, it should have a kind of special party or event every month of the year, especially in the places that were important for our independence. But nothing was done because of this liberal mentality, where there should be no official state support to anything, and if you put everything in private hands, things are great. Well, global culture is mostly private owned and private financed, and it's the shit we have, internationally, the radio parades, the MTV parades, or whatever else. It's basically pop shit, and it's basically privately, and the Renaissance, as you said, as you implied, it was state financed, in the sense that the Vatican financed, the Florentine government, the Milanese government, and the other governments. For example, Goethe in Weimar, he was financed by the prince. Wagner was by the prince. The Louis XIV, he financed the French Baroque writers, painters, and musicians, etc.
Yeah, and even nowadays, like for example, Korea, South Korea, the amount of government money that it went to K-pop, and what impact does that have
Oh,
in
I didn't even
South
know.
Korean culture? You know?
I didn't
Yeah,
even
no,
know.
the Korean government invests heavily
Oh,
on
interesting.
Korean culture and movies.
Yes, it's interesting. Yes, they are doing it right. They are not wrong about doing that. But regarding your question, I'd say that we need to go step by step, in the sense that we need to build a decent culture for our own selves, because of course culture is the cultivation of man. It's not commodity. It's basically something that helps building man. So we need to, because, for example, I've seen some nationalists that, like, that they when they see or hear gringo listening to funk, that's our soft power. We need to make all the world dance funk or something like that. Yeah, I don't actually want my country to be known as a funk exporter, because then, of course, eventually the foreigners are going to get pissed about our cultural exports, and they're going to begin hunting Brazilians or anything like that. So yes, first we need to build a decent culture for our own selves. We have enough raw material in our past, in our history, in past painters, musicians, and writers, etc. Then we need to begin thinking about Latin America, in the sense that trying to influence them even into speaking Portuguese, into learning our history, etc. And also the other side of the ocean. And of course, a part of it is going maybe to become global. It's going to be compete on a very high level. The la creme de la creme of what we do is going to compete on the highest level. Like, for example, a beat of our bossa nova. a bit of our bossa nova became global. You know, Tom Jobim, etc. A bit of it became global, and that was good. It was deserved. I don't. I'm not a listener of bossa nova, but yes, it deserved to become global, and it became global because it had quality. Even Dugin, for example, his favorite musical style is bossa nova. He's a Russian expert in bossa nova. You know, he plays bossa nova in the guitar.
Damn. Damn,
Quite
bro.
interesting. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Just,
So
and oh, excuse.
no, no,
Sorry,
no.
sorry
Yes,
to
please, please,
interrupt.
please.
Okay, no, just something that I like to punctuate. The thing that you said about our neighbors. Brazil pretty much is a cultural island. Like we don't have any interaction with our neighbors, and that's something that I noticed pretty drastically. The difference between, for example, Brazil and Mexico. My father is Salvadoran, so and I saw the like Salvadorans, despite being pretty far away from Mexicans, they pretty much like them Mexican things. Like they listen to Mexican music, they copy some Mexican styles and something like this. And I see that like the Hispanic world has more of this. They usually interact more with each other, but I don't see that with Brazil. Like with some exceptions, like Rio Grande do Sul, which like you kind of have a contact with Argentina, Uruguay. I don't see that for the rest of Brazil. Like we don't Hispanic music. Hispanics don't listen to our music. We
No,
don't
no.
have any much interactions.
But I would even say adding to that the one good thing about Brazil, at least that we at least have it, is that majority of Brazilian music is listened to Brazilians, and majority of Brazilians listen to Brazilian music. So at least we consume our own culture, even though our culture is decaying a bit. We consume. I graph. I know,
Yes,
but
it's something
Brazilians
very
listen
specific
to
of
Brazilian
Brazil, at
music
least
instead of like
nowadays.
foreign things.
But yeah, part of it is because of our colonization, in the sense that we were we were building our country from the coast to inside of the continent, while the Spaniards were coming from the other side, closer to the Pacific and in this direction. So the middle of the continent is still nowadays is mostly empty, at least on the part of Brazil. So that's part of it. Also, I'd say that we have been negligent regarding that. We had some interesting initiatives in the past, political mostly, but a bit cultural. For example, I'd say that in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, we maybe more of cultural dialogue with the neighboring countries, because of the circumstances, the independences and all of that. For example, Brazilian intellectuals read Jose de Vasconcelos, the Mexican, who wrote about the cosmic race, the idea of a new race that would come from Latin America. They also interacted, for example, with Jose Augusto Rodó, the Uruguayan, who wrote about the duality between Caliban and Ariel, the characters from Shakespeare, as a kind of metaphor for the contradiction between North America or Anglo-Saxon America and Latin America. So there was in the past a bit of dialogue. Vargas tried to build a kind of geopolitical alliance with Peron. The military dictatorship supported the Argentinian dictatorship against the United Kingdom, and yes, in the Malvinas War. And after that, it was basically economics. It was basically graphs and Excel sheets with Mercosur. It was basically, oh, we need to have free trade, and that's it. Who cares? Yes, who cares?
Yeah,
There was
just copy
also
European.
a bit coming from the left wing, but it was mostly very superficial. But there's potential. There's potential because there's a lot of things that are
Yeah,
similar between our countries regarding our origins, the Catholic influence, the social and political aspects. Even a bit of the music, a bit of, for example, northern Brazilian music and northeastern
yeah,
Brazilian music is a bit close to, Colombian, Venezuelan music, just like Rio Grande do Sul music, Gauchos music is very close to Argentinian, Uruguayan, Chilean music.
Yeah.
So there are some ground for it. The languages are mostly mutually understandable. At least it seems that they understand us reasonably. We sometimes have some difficulties if we are talking to a Chilean guy because no one understands Chilean guys. Uh, yes, yes, yes. No one understands them.
Yeah,
But yes, there's
language,
but
basically.
there's no initiative. As you very well said, Mexico actually seems to have
Yeah.
had a kind of cultural impact in all of Central America. Mexico actually acted as a regional hegemon, just like Brazil should have acted regarding our neighboring countries, and not in the sense of oppression, imperialism, etc., but in the sense of, for example, building fucking railroads from Porto Alegre to Mont, or building, more bridges, more roads, investing money in these countries, doing, creating united military units, also unifying intelligence, like our secret service, the Argentinian secret service, etc. We need to begin influencing this region, or the United States is going to basically do it. Yeah.
Yeah, just take over like it did in the past, right? Just because we didn't pay attention to that. And yeah, yeah, pretty much. And I think that Mexico is a pretty good example because very it's a country with very similar to ours. Like huge violence and this kind of like this unity inside the country that they pretty much influence much of the Hispanic world. Like. And there's a kind of like unity, even though like Hispanics, they might like that's the thing. Like a Brazilian who doesn't see as part of the same community as the Hispanics. While the Hispanics, like even if the guy is like from Colombia or Mexico, like they're gonna say, no, we're all Hispanics. We can help each other. And I miss that in Brazil. We should have more of that. But yeah, that's quite an interesting topic to think about it. And I think that there needs to be more state investment in that. Of course, not only state, but like even like part of the elite needs to invest.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I'd say that even from a kind of elite level thought, we could be paying more attention to our neighboring countries. But for example, the generals, because when we talk about elite, I'd say we should be talking about political elite, economic elite, military elite, academic elite, etc. But the generals, for example, they only think about the United States. The politicians, basically, either they are thinking about the United States or their own selves. They don't actually pay attention to the region. The economic elite, they only care about the neighboring countries if they can export something to them, but something very superficial. The cultural elite, at least the left wingers have a bit of
Uh-huh.
advantage in that because sometimes they pay attention to Latin America as an idea, etc. But most of us not.
Yeah, no, and I think that's sorry, Al. I think that this is a great opening for us to close our session here. I'd like to thank Rafael Machado. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it. And Ayala, do you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I just finished that. I
Oh,
say
of
like,
course.
and I think the problem with left wing, the way that this in Latin America is usually it's from like a very Marxist lens, like only seeing like the material aspect, like Latin Americans, yeah, they were so much exploited and stuff like that. But like it goes beyond that, like we have a spiritual action and everything, and a cultural, linguistic, historical, it goes beyond that. So I think it's a really stupid way that they see like this connection between the Latin American countries.
Yes, no, I agree. A connection
Oh yeah,
based
no.
only on being oppressed, that's not an identity. There's so much more interesting about it. For example, even our Catholicism, it's, for example, of course, Catholicism in Brazil is pretty much pagan influenced in the sense that there's a lot of syncretism, etc. Some people like it, some other people don't like it. But even though there's this kind of diversity, the other countries also have it. Argentina has some saints, popular saints, who are not recognized by the Catholic Church, but they are followed by poor people. There's the Gauchito Hill, which is a kind of gaucho saint that was basically a bandit in his life. In Colombia, you have also, for example, saints, popular saints. In Venezuela, you also have you have, for example, the Maria Leonza cult in Venezuela, which is very similar to Candomblé in Brazil. So there's even, of course, not everyone likes this kind of stuff, but even if we take from a purely academic perspective, it's very interesting that there are similarities between our countries that we don't explore, we don't talk about, we don't try to understand, etc.
Yeah, pretty much. So that was okay. We can conclude now.
Yeah.
So well,
Yes, thank you very much, Rafael, today for this podcast. It was really good, even though it was for a
it
short
was a
bit, but
really
it
great
was really
conversation. Really enjoyed. Thank you, Rafael.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. And of course, in the future, I'm available for another talk.
Oh, surely we will be.
thank you very much. We appreciate that.